I've stripped 40 wrecks out of the debris field at Holloway's Reach, and I never once expected to find something alive in the wreckage. Metal, sure, old fuel cells, sometimes a body gone stiff and gray in the cold, which you learn to bag and log without flinching, but not a child. She was folded into the crash couch of a lifeboat that had punched into the rock shelf hard enough to fold its own nose in half, and she was so still, I nearly cut through the webbing without checking twice. Then she moved. Just her eyes, first. Silver. The kind of silver that catches a headlamp and throws it back like a coin flipping in the dark. Her skin had the color of hoarfrost on a window, and there was a thin membrane along her collarbone that fluttered when she breathed. Quick and shallow, like something built for a warmer world than this one. I'd been alone on that rock for 6 years. I talked to my tools more than to people. I didn't know what to do with a child looking up at me like I was the last violent thing standing between her and whatever had put her there. So I did the only thing I knew. I put my hands where she could see them, and I said, low, the way you'd talk to a spooked animal, that I wasn't going to hurt her. She didn't believe me, not that first hour. But she let me cut the webbing, and she let me carry her. And by the time I had her back in my hab, wrapped in the good wool blanket I'd been saving for nothing in particular, she'd stopped shaking quite so hard. I called her Rue, because that was the sound she made when I asked her name, over and over, patient, like it was the only word she had left. Maybe it was. The lifeboat's log was scoured clean, not damaged, scoured, which told me somebody with real tools had gone through it after the crash and taken everything but the girl. That should have told me to put her on the first outbound freighter and wash my hands of the whole business. Instead, I fixed the environmental seals on my hab a little tighter, and I didn't sleep much, and I kept my rifle by the door. Those 9 days taught me things about her I hadn't expected to learn. She didn't eat like a human child. She'd take a little of everything on her plate and leave it untouched for an hour before she'd trust it, like she was waiting to see if the food itself might turn on her. She flinched at sudden light, but leaned into warmth, pressing her cold little hands flat against the hab's heating vent, until I worried she'd burn herself, though she never did. Her people ran colder than mine, I came to understand, built for some world with a thinner sun. She watched me work on a fuel regulator one evening, hands quick and sure with the old tools, and when I finally handed her a spare coupling to hold, just to give her hands something to do, she turned it over and over, like it was the first ordinary object anyone had trusted her with in a long time. I started leaving small jobs for her after that. Nothing that mattered. A gasket to clean, a wire to strip. It gave her something to be besides afraid, and it gave me, if I'm honest, something to be besides alone. 9 days later, the trackers came. 3 of them, Concordat issue coats, soft-spoken the way people are soft-spoken, right up until they're not. Their leader was a narrow man named Collis with a voice like he was doing me a favor just by asking. He said the girl was carrying something, a cipher, seeded into her nervous system before the crash, some old imperial trick, encoding a data key into a living thing, because living things don't show up on a scanner sweep the way a drive does. He said it like it explained everything, like it made her less of a girl and more of a lockbox that happened to breathe. She's not carrying anything for you, I told him. She's carrying something for the Concordat, he said, which amounts to the same courtesy. Either way it's collected. I told him to get off my yard. He smiled like I'd confirmed something for him, and left with his 2 quiet men, and that was worse than if he'd shouted, because quiet men who smile like that come back. They came back 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Once with money, an amount that would have bought me off that rock and into a soft retirement somewhere with real weather. Once with paper, a requisition order stamped by somebody with a title long enough to sound important, which I fed into my furnace while Collis watched. The 3rd time they didn't bring anything at all. They just stood at the edge of my claim markers and looked at the hab like they were measuring the walls, and I understood then that the offers were finished, and whatever came next would be simpler and uglier. Rue understood it too, in her way. She'd taken to sitting near the tool bench while I worked, quiet, watching my hands the way you'd watch something you were trying to learn by heart. That night, after Collis's men had gone, she came and stood in the doorway of the workshop and said, not asked, said, flat, like she'd been turning it over, "You should give me back." "No," I said. "They'll hurt you instead." "They can try." She looked at me a long moment with those coin-silver eyes, and something in her face went from fear to something quieter, harder to name. I've thought about that look 100 times since. I don't think anyone had told her no on her own behalf before. I don't think anyone had made it a fight worth having. I won't dress up what happened after that as more than it was. I'm not a soldier. I'm a woman who fixes reactor couplings and knows the debris field better than any tracker ever could. And when Collis's men finally came for her in the dead hours before the yard's dawn cycle, I met them on ground I'd chosen, in a maze of gutted hulls I'd spent 6 years learning to move through blind. It was ugly, and it was fast, and none of it happened where Rue could see it. When it was done, Collis left on his own 2 feet, which is more mercy than he offered me, and he didn't come back a 4th time. I don't know what report he filed. I don't much care. What mattered was that the cipher, whatever it truly was, stayed exactly where it had always been, inside a 9-year-old girl who deserved better than to be anyone's lockbox. I dug her scrap of a memory further after that, patient, the way you'd coax a burned circuit back to life. And eventually, I found something worth more than any code, a thread of family. A trading clan, scattered when the raiders hit whatever colony she'd come from, still broadcasting a low, looping distress marker out past the reach in case any of their own had survived. I ran that signal down through an old relay contact I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman named Osk, who owed me a favor from a life before this one, and Osk found them. Not fast. It took the better part of 2 months, and Rue grew an inch in that time, and started sleeping without the light on, and once, only once, she laughed at something I said, which nearly undid me more than the trackers ever had. The clan sent 1 ship, no fleet, no fanfare, a battered trader with a mismatched hull, and a captain who cried the plain, unguarded way people cry when they've stopped believing something, and then it happens anyway. Rue's aunt, it turned out, thin and silver-eyed, just like her, who held her so hard I heard the girl's breath catch. I didn't make a speech. There wasn't one in me. I gave Rue the data tablet I'd fixed for her, the one she'd learned her letters on, cracked screen and all, and told her it was hers now, wherever she went. She held onto my sleeve for a moment at the airlock, not crying, just holding on, and then she let go, because that's what you do when the thing you were protecting doesn't need protecting anymore. That's the whole job, in the end. You hold on exactly as hard as you're needed, and no harder, and you let the letting go be its own kind of keeping faith. The trader pulled off the yard at first light. I watched until its drive flare was just another star, indistinguishable from the rest, and then I went back inside. Her bunk is still made up the way she left it. I haven't had the heart to strip it for parts, and out here, everything gets stripped for parts eventually. Everything except that. I fix reactor couplings again, mostly. I talk to my tools more than to people, same as before. But some nights I catch myself listening for a small voice, asking me to say her name back to her, over and over, the way you'd hand somebody something precious, and watch to make sure they didn't drop it. I didn't. Not once. And whatever else I get wrong out here, alone on this rock, I know that much stayed true.